The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Hyatt Seoul cast a dazzling, fractured light across a ballroom teeming with Asia's most formidable elite. For Zara Thompson, the opulence felt less like an invitation and more like a barrier. Draped in an elegant emerald green evening gown that beautifully complemented her deep brown skin, she felt entirely detached from the billionaires and diplomats surrounding her. She hadn't come to South Korea to play political games or exchange superficial pleasantries, so she retreated. Finding a quiet, shadowed table near the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights, she contentedly sipped her champagne, choosing to be a silent observer. Then the heavy atmosphere of the room shifted. A few yards away, a 7-year-old girl in a pristine white dress with pearl buttons slipped past a formidable perimeter of broad-shouldered men in dark suits. Carrying a small, worn, stuffed rabbit, the child walked with an innocent, unbothered grace. She moved past tech moguls, past high-ranking politicians, and past men whose names were spoken in hushed, terrified whispers. None of them mattered to her. Her bright, curious eyes scanned the room until they landed on the one person who wasn't trying to perform. Zara watched, stunned, as the little girl stopped right beside her table. The child looked up, her soft Korean features breaking into a shy, radiant smile. "Can I sit with you?" she whispered. The soft request caught Zara completely off guard. The contrast between the child's pure vulnerability and the rigid, intimidating atmosphere of the gala was striking. Zara's expression softened instantly, her naturally warm smile gracing her lips. "Of course you can," she replied gently. As the little girl eagerly climbed into the heavy velvet chair beside her, a sudden, suffocating silence fell over the immediate radius of the ballroom. The ambient clinking of champagne flutes stopped. The low hum of elite conversation evaporated into thin air. Zara felt the immediate drop in temperature. Before she understood why, several bodyguards instantly reached for their earpieces, their postures hardening into lethal alertness. Across the room, a dangerously handsome Korean man slowly rose from his seat. Towering at over 6 feet in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, his presence alone seemed to command the oxygen in the space. He had a sharp, flawless jawline, and his dark eyes were intensely focused on the table by the window. His calm expression betrayed no emotion, yet every powerful guest in attendance instinctively stepped back, clearing a path. Zara felt a sudden prickle of apprehension as she looked from the little girl's serene face to the intimidating man advancing toward them. She had no idea who he was. She didn't know his name was Kang Ji-hoon, or that his legitimate corporate empire masked a far darker truth. But looking at the silent, terrified deference of the crowd around him, she realized one thing with absolute certainty. The child who had just sought comfort in her solitude was the daughter of a man who ruled this city. The rhythmic click of Ji-hoon's polished leather shoes against the marble floor felt like a countdown. With every step he took toward the window, the ballroom grew more suffocatingly quiet. His dark, observant eyes were locked onto the young black woman sitting beside his daughter. He had spent a lifetime learning to read people in a single glance, and usually he saw only 2 things in the presence of his family: calculated ambition or paralyzing fear. But as he stopped a few feet from the table, his broad shoulders casting a long shadow, he found neither. Zara did not flinch. She did not instantly rise to bow, nor did she stammer out an apology for occupying the space. Instead, she looked up, meeting his intense gaze, with a calm, elegant poise that caught him completely off guard. "Leah," Ji-hoon said, his voice a low, commanding baritone that usually made grown men tremble. "You have crossed the ballroom without permission. You are intruding on this lady's evening." Leah hugged her stuffed rabbit tighter, but didn't look afraid. She said I could sit here, Appa. Zara smiled gently, first at the little girl, and then she turned that warmth directly onto Jihoon. Up close, her large, expressive brown eyes held a striking clarity. She isn't intruding at all, Mr. She paused politely, inviting him to fill in the blank, completely unfazed by the small army of suited bodyguards hovering just out of earshot. Actually, she's the most refreshing conversation partner I've encountered all night. The adults in this room seem far too busy projecting power to actually talk. Jihoon's hand, resting on the back of an empty chair, tightened slightly. The sheer audacity of her words, delivered with such polite, refreshing honesty, shook something loose behind his guarded exterior. Everyone in Seoul bowed to his status, treating him like an untouchable god or a lethal threat. Yet here was a stranger, wrapped in emerald green, speaking to him as if he were simply a father looking for his child. People in this room project what is necessary to survive, Jihoon replied, his sharp jawline tightening as he studied her. He looked for a tremor in her hands, a flicker of deceit, anything that signaled she knew who he was. There was nothing, just pure, unapologetic sincerity. Perhaps, Zara said softly, her gaze dropping to Leah before rising back to his. But survival looks incredibly exhausting when it means a little girl has to walk across an entire ballroom just to find someone who will simply look her in the eye. A rare microscopic twitch at the corner of Jihoon's lips was the only sign of his profound shock. For the first time in years, the powerful Mafia boss found himself momentarily speechless, entirely captivated by the quiet strength of the woman who had no idea whose fire she was playing with. The serene, minimalist halls of the National Museum of Korea offered a stark contrast to the suffocating opulence of the gala. Yet for Zara, the quiet felt just as heavy. She moved slowly through the exhibit, her eyes tracing the elegant curves of Joseon-era white porcelain. She had only 2 days left in Seoul before her flight back to the United States, and she wanted to absorb the city's history on her own terms. She didn't know that every step of her itinerary had been meticulously tracked. She didn't know that a billionaire's immense corporate resources had quietly cleared the gallery's top floor under the guise of a private VIP viewing, all because a 7-year-old girl had refused to let her leave the country without saying goodbye. They say the beauty of this porcelain lies in its imperfections. A deep, familiar baritone echoed through the high-ceilinged room. Zara turned, her breath catching slightly. Emerging from the shadows of the gallery was Kang Ji-hoon. He had traded his charcoal gala attire for a tailored black overcoat, but his commanding presence remained completely intact. Holding his hand, looking up with bright, expectant eyes, was Leah. Appa kept his promise, Leah beamed, letting go of her father's hand to eagerly approach Zara. Zara's heart softened instantly as she knelt to greet the little girl, adjusting the silk ribbon in Leah's hair. "I didn't think I'd see you again, Leah. Are you enjoying the museum?" "I wanted to show you the art," Leah said purely, though her eyes darted toward her father, who stood a respectful distance away, watching them with an intensity that felt almost physical. When Zara stood, she met Jihoon's dark gaze. The chance nature of this meeting wasn't lost on her. A man of his stature didn't just wander into a public museum unannounced. Yet there was no hostility in his eyes, only a profound, quiet curiosity. "You have a habit of seeking out the quietest corners of Seoul, Ms. Thompson," Jihoon remarked, stepping closer. The subtle scent of cedar and expensive linen drifted between them. "I find that history, much like people, speaks louder when it isn't trying to shout," Zara replied, her voice smooth and grounded. She gestured to the minimalist vase before them. Modern society values flawless synchronization, but this pottery accepts its own fragility. It's honest. Ji-hoon studied her profile, struck by the depth behind her radiant deep brown skin. In his world, fragility was a death sentence, a flaw to be purged. Yet hearing her speak, the concept felt less like a weakness and more like a rare form of courage. Honesty is a luxury few can afford, Ji-hoon said softly, his voice dropping an octave as the space between them grew charged with an unspoken, magnetic tension. Then I suppose I am very wealthy, Zara countered, looking directly into his eyes with a brilliant, unfazed smile. Because I refuse to live any other way. Ji-hoon remained silent, but the guarded walls around his heart suffered another hairline fracture. He realized then that letting her leave Seoul might be the safest choice, but it was a choice he was no longer willing to make. The morning sun cut sharply through the floor-to-ceiling windows of a private dining suite, overlooking the Han River. Zara sat across from Ji-hoon, a delicate porcelain teacup cradled in her hands. Next to her, Leah was engrossed in sketching a picture of her stuffed rabbit, completely at peace. It was a level of tranquility the little girl rarely displayed, a fact that had not escaped Ji-hoon's razor-sharp observation. Ji-hoon watched his daughter laugh at something Zara whispered. For months, Leah had been slipping into a silent, guarded shell, suffocated by the rigid security and isolation of his life. Yet in less than 48 hours, this American stranger had unlocked his daughter's joy. It was an unprecedented emotional breakthrough, and for a man who managed global risks, it required an immediate, strategic response. Setting his teacup down, with a soft click, Ji-hoon leaned forward, drawing Zara's attention. Ms. Thompson, I understand your flight departs tomorrow evening? Zara nodded, a faint trace of regret touching her expressive brown eyes. Yes, back to reality. My time in Seoul has been short, but incredibly memorable. It doesn't have to end, Ji-hoon said smoothly, his commanding voice carrying a weight that made the room feel instantly smaller. He slid a sleek, leather-bound document across the pristine tablecloth. My corporation is launching a new global education initiative, headquartered right here in Seoul. We are establishing an elite foundation to fund progressive schooling models internationally. I want you to head the consultancy team. Zara blinked, stunned. She looked from the document to his unreadable, striking features. Mr. Kang, I am flattered, but you barely know me. My credentials are strong, but surely there are local executives. I am not hiring your credentials, Zara, he interrupted gently, using her first name for the first time. The sound of it on his lips sent a strange electric thrill through her. I am hiring your perspective. You see people, not titles. You possess an authenticity that cannot be manufactured or bought. The salary and benefits reflect the elite nature of the position, including full relocation and residence. Zara looked down at the contract, her heart racing. The compensation was staggering. Generational wealth standard. It was everything she had ever wanted for her career. A chance to make a profound global impact on education, fully funded by a pristine, multi-billion-dollar multinational empire. She looked up, meeting his intense, dark gaze. You're offering me a dream, Mr. Kang, but why do I feel like there's a catch? Ji-hoon's expression remained perfectly calm, though a flicker of admiration crossed his eyes. The only catch is that my daughter expects to see you for Sunday dinners. Zara looked at Leah, who was looking up with hopeful, wide brown eyes. The warmth in Zara's heart melted away, her remaining hesitation. Then I accept, she said softly, reaching out to shake his hand. As Ji-hoon's large, warm hand wrapped around hers, sealing the deal, Zara smiled, completely unaware that the spotless corporate foundation she had just joined was the ultimate shield for Korea's most ruthless mafia empire. She had just stepped into the tiger's den, and the door had quietly locked behind her. The transition to life in Seoul happened with a fluid, dizzying speed that only boundless wealth could command. Within weeks, Zara was settled into a sleek, minimalist apartment in Hanam-dong. Her days divided between the glass-walled offices of Kang Holdings and the grand, quiet estate where Leah lived. As the newly appointed head consultant for the Global Education Foundation, Zara poured her passion into the curriculum. But her favorite hours were spent after the spreadsheets were closed, sitting on the plush carpets of the Kang estate, mentoring Leah. Under Zara's guidance, the young girl thrived, her laughter becoming a frequent, beautiful disruption to the mansion's heavy silence. And watching it all from the periphery was Ji-hoon. Initially, he had observed their sessions from the doorway, a silent, imposing figure in a charcoal suit. But as the autumn leaves began to turn amber outside the estate windows, the distance between them shrank. Ji-hoon began staying for tea. Then he began joining them on the floor, shedding his suit jacket to help Leah construct elaborate cardboard models of the schools Zara was designing. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Zara saw the first true fracture in his frozen exterior. Leah had fallen asleep mid-sentence, her head resting softly against Zara's lap, her tiny fingers still clutching her stuffed rabbit. Zara frozen, afraid to move and wake the child. Ji-hoon, who had been reviewing documents at a nearby table, quietly stood and walked over. Instead of calling for a nanny or handling the situation with his usual rigid efficiency, Ji-hoon knelt beside Zara. The movement was incredibly fluid and graceful for a man of his stature. Slowly, with an almost agonizing tenderness, he brushed a stray lock of silky black hair away from his daughter's face. His dark, observant eyes, usually so sharp and calculating, softened with a profound, consuming warmth. "She hasn't slept this deeply in a very long time," Ji-hoon murmured, his low baritone barely a whisper. He looked up, his face only inches from Zara's. In the soft glow of the lamp, his sharp jawline seemed less like armor and more like a frame for a man carrying a heavy, invisible burden. "She just needed to know she was allowed to just be a child," Zara replied softly, her heart skipping a beat at his proximity. The scent of cedarwood and faint rain drifted from him, wrapping around her. And maybe her father needed to see that too. Ji-hoon looked at Zara, his guarded eyes searching her expressive face. For a fleeting second, the terrifying, powerful CEO disappeared, replaced by a fiercely protective, deeply compassionate man who valued honesty above all else. He offered her a small, microscopic smile, a genuine, rare curve of his lips that sent a sudden, electric warmth rushing through Zara's veins. "Perhaps you are right, Zara," he said gently, carefully lifting Leah into his broad arms. As he stood, his gaze lingered on Zara, leaving a charged, undeniable tension hanging in the quiet room. A quiet before a storm. Neither of them could stop. The autumn air in Seoul grew crisper, and with the changing season, an invisible weight settled over the glass towers of Kang Holdings. While Zara focused on finalizing the foundation's international curriculum, an underlying current of tension began to ripple through the upper floors. Security guards became more rigid, and the quiet, urgent murmurs of Ji-hoon's inner circle grew frequent. Deep in the city's shadows, a rival syndicate faction had been watching the untouchable billionaire. They noted the subtle shifts in his highly predictable schedule, tracking his frequent visits to the education wing, and they quickly deduced that the cold, lethal boss had developed a new vulnerability. Zara remained largely insulated from the danger until a rainy Tuesday evening. Having left her tablet in the executive boardroom, she walked back up to the top floor, long after standard office hours. The hallway was unnervingly quiet, the city lights below throwing long, fractured shadows across the minimalist decor. As she approached the frosted glass doors of the boardroom, a sharp, crashing sound shattered the silence, followed by a choked, desperate plea in Korean. Zara froze, her breath catching in her throat. Through the slightly ajar door, the scene unfolded with terrifying clarity. The warmth and quiet tenderness she had witnessed from Ji-hoon on the living room floor weeks ago were completely gone. Standing under the stark LED lights, he looked like a god of ruin. His suit jacket was off, the sleeves of his crisp white shirt rolled up to his forearms. He didn't have a weapon, but he didn't need one. His broad silhouette radiated a terrifying, predatory stillness that made the entire room feel heavy with dread. On the floor before him, a high-ranking corporate director, a man Zara recognized from budget meetings, was trembling violently, his face pale with raw terror. Two of Ji-hoon's personal security detail stood like statues at the door. "You thought you could leak my daughter's travel schedule and walk out of this building alive?" Ji-hoon's voice was lower than usual, a lethal, quiet rasp that sent a shiver of absolute ice down Zara's spine. It wasn't the voice of a CEO. It was the voice of an absolute ruler. Please, Chairman Kang. They threatened my family." The man sobbed. Ji-hoon stepped forward, his dark eyes pitch black and devoid of mercy. He tilted the man's chin up. With a single gloved finger, his sharp jawline set in stone. "If a single shadow falls over my daughter, or anyone under my protection, I will not just eliminate you. I will erase everything you have ever touched. Begging me is a waste of your remaining breath." Zara backed away slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs, her hand pressed tightly over her mouth to stifle a gasp. The sheer overwhelming force of his commanding authority was paralyzing. In that fleeting, dark moment, the pristine veil of the billionaire businessman tore open, leaving Zara to stare into the terrifying abyss of who Kang Ji-hoon truly was. The air grew thick with a tense, unsaid truth after that night at the office, but Ji-hoon's response was swift. Under the pretense of a weekend retreat to celebrate the Foundation's upcoming launch, he escorted Zara and Leah far beyond the suffocating concrete of Seoul, deep into the misty pine-covered hills of Gangwon Province. The private family estate was a masterclass in traditional Hanok architecture, blended with modern security. Behind the elegant wooden gates and stone walls sat a high-tech fortress, surrounded by discreet, armed guards patrolling the perimeter. Away from the city's watchful eyes, the heavy dread that had settled in Zara's chest began to lift. Leah spent the afternoon running through the manicured gardens, her joyful laughter breathing life into the secluded estate. By midnight, the fortress was quiet. Leah was fast asleep, and the sky had cleared into a breathtaking expanse of brilliant, piercing stars. Zara stood on the wide wooden veranda, a thick wool shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, looking up at the constellations. Hearing a soft, measured step behind her, she didn't need to turn to know who it was. The subtle scent of cedar and crisp night air always preceded him. Ji-hoon stepped up to the railing, his dark eyes reflecting the starlight. He had shed his usual armor of structured suits for a simple black cashmere sweater, looking devastatingly handsome and strangely vulnerable against the vastness of the night. "You're quiet tonight, Zara," he murmured, his low baritone cutting through the chirping of the crickets. Zara turned her head to look at his sharp, perfect profile. "I was just thinking about how different the world looks from up here. Down there, everything feels so calculated, so dangerous." She paused, her expressive brown eyes searching his face. I saw you in the boardroom the other night, Ji-hoon. Ji-hoon's entire posture stiffened, a muscle leaping in his jaw. The silence between them stretched, heavy and electric, with unspoken stakes. He turned fully to face her, stepping closer until the heat radiating from his broad frame completely enveloped her. "Does it terrify you?" he asked softly, his gaze dropping to her lips before locking onto her eyes with a raw, agonizing intensity. "The man you saw? The power terrifies me," Zara confessed, honestly, her voice steady despite the rapid pounding of her heart. "But when I look at you right now, I don't see a monster. I see a father who is carrying a weight heavy enough to crush anyone else." Ji-hoon's breath hitched. For a fleeting, intoxicating moment, the urge to strip away the lies completely overpowered his rigid discipline. He wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to confess that he was the head of the country's most feared Mafia syndicate, that his hands were stained with blood, and that she was the only pure thing he had ever touched. He leaned in, his hand hovering just inches from her cheek, the magnetic pull between them undeniable. "I am the shadow in this city, Zara." The words formed in his throat. But as his dark eyes swept over her radiant skin and pure, trusting expression, the cold reality of his world slammed shut. Truth was a target. If she knew, she became an accomplice. If she knew, she became prey. To love her meant to keep her in the dark. "There are things you shouldn't have to carry, Zara," Ji-hoon whispered, his hand dropping back to his side as he pulled back just an inch, re-establishing the wall. "Just trust that as long as you are here, I will never let the darkness touch you." The fragile peace of the mountain retreat shattered the moment they returned to Seoul. Early that evening, a high-priority alert regarding a sudden crisis at a European shipping port forced Ji-hoon away, luring him to a counterfeit emergency meeting across the city. He had left Zara and Leah under the care of a trusted four-man security detail at an exclusive, high-end boutique restaurant in Cheongdam-dong. The venue was nearly empty, reserved entirely for their privacy, its soft jazz music creating a deceptive illusion of safety. Zara was listening to Leah recount a story about her school project when the ambient music suddenly cut out. Through the tinted glass windows, Zara caught the reflection of two black vans screeching to a halt outside. Within seconds, the muted thud of suppressed gunfire echoed from the foyer. Her guards didn't even have time to shout before the heavy glass doors shattered inward. Panic was a luxury Zara couldn't afford. As the first wave of masked, armed men burst into the dining room, her heart hammered violently against her ribs. But her mind locked into a crystalline, absolute focus. She didn't scream. Instead, she dropped to the floor, wrapping her body over Leah to shield her from the flying glass. "Leah, look at me," Zara whispered, her voice incredibly calm and steady, despite the chaos. She gripped the trembling girl's shoulders, looking directly into her wide, terrified brown eyes. "We are going to play a game, like hide and seek at the estate. You need to be completely silent, okay? No matter what you hear." Leah nodded tearfully, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Zara's eyes scanned the immediate area. Just past their table was a heavy, floor-length velvet curtain concealing a narrow service lift used for elite wine deliveries. Moving with fluid, quiet speed, Zara pulled the curtain back, nudged Leah into the shallow alcove of the lift, and pressed the manual override to lock the small metal door from the outside. She smoothed the velvet fabric back into place just as heavy, hurried footsteps rounded the corner. Zara stood up, smoothing her dress, deliberately drawing their attention away from the curtain. 3 masked men cornered her, their weapons raised. "Where is the child?" one demanded in rough Korean, stepping aggressively into her space. Zara raised her hands, her deep brown skin pale, but her expression entirely unyielding. "I'm alone," she said in English, her tone projecting a brilliant, poised defiance. "I don't know what you're talking about." The leader stepped forward, raising the butt of his weapon to strike her. But the restaurant's front wall detonated outward. Ji-hoon's elite tactical team arrived not like police, but like a localized storm of absolute ruin. Flashbangs blinded the room, followed by the deafening, precise rhythm of professional gunfire. Within less than 60 seconds, the rival syndicate attackers were systematically eliminated, their bodies hitting the polished floorboards. The heavy silence returned, thick with the scent of gunpowder. The service door burst open, and Ji-hoon charged into the room, his crisp white shirt stained with blood, his face a mask of raw, terrifying fury. When his eyes locked onto Zara, standing safe amidst the wreckage, the predatory darkness in his gaze broke into pure, breathless relief. The air in the ruined restaurant was thick with the acrid stench of ozone, copper, and smoke. Zara stood frozen as Ji-hoon crossed the debris-strewn floor in 3 massive, frantic strides. He reached her, his large hands gripping her shoulders, with a desperation that shattered his usual, untouchable composure. His chest heaved, and beneath the tears in his expensive white shirt, his skin was slick with sweat and the blood of other men. "Zara," he breathed, his voice a raw, fractured rasp. His dark eyes searched her face, frantic for any sign of injury. "Are you hurt? Where is Leah?" Zara could barely find her voice, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She simply pointed toward the velvet curtain. One of Ji-hoon's tactical men immediately stepped forward, unlocking the service lift. The moment the metal door slid open, Leah scrambled out, tearfully throwing herself into her father's arms. Ji-hoon collapsed to his knees, burying his face in his daughter's hair, holding her so tightly his knuckles turned white. But as the immediate terror subsided, the horrific reality of the room pressed in on Zara. Surrounding them, the men in tactical gear weren't police officers or corporate bodyguards. They moved with a chilling, synchronized lethality, casually checking the pulses of the fallen attackers and securing the perimeter with absolute, practiced authority. One of them stepped toward Ji-hoon, bowing deeply from the waist. "Chairman Kang," the man said in a low, reverent tone, "the rival faction's vanguard has been completely liquidated. The remaining syndicates are retreating across the city. Your orders?" Ji-hoon stood up, lifting Leah effortlessly against his shoulder. When he turned back to Zara, the frantic father had vanished. In his place stood a man radiating a cold, devastating sovereignty that made the entire room feel heavy with dread. His sharp jawline was set like stone, his dark eyes pitch black and merciless. "Find their leadership," Ji-hoon commanded, his voice a quiet, lethal growl that echoed off the shattered glass. "Erase them. Let Seoul remember who rules this underworld." The final veil shattered. The pristine corporate offices, the elite Global Education Foundation, the Billionaire CEO title. It was all an elaborate shield. Zara stared at him, the truth washing over her in a wave of absolute ice. He wasn't just a powerful businessman with enemies. He was the head of the Korean Mafia. Ji-hoon saw the realization dawn in her expressive brown eyes, and a flash of agonizing pain pierced through his dark exterior. He stepped toward her, reaching out a blood-stained hand. "Zara, let me explain. I did this to protect—" "Don't," Zara whispered, backing away a step. She wasn't terrified of him. She could see the profound, desperate love for his daughter still burning in his gaze. She was terrified of the violent, blood-soaked abyss he inhabited, a world where a simple dinner could end in a massacre. Her mind spun, suffocated by the sudden weight of the danger she had willingly stepped into. I need to go. Please." Without waiting for his response, Zara turned and fled into the rain-soaked Seoul night, desperate for distance to process the terrifying truth of the man who held her heart. The rain had stopped by the time Ji-hoon arrived at Zara's apartment, but the air between them remained heavy with the aftermath of a storm. He stood in her minimalist living room, wearing a fresh suit that looked more like armor than attire. His striking features were perfectly composed, yet his dark eyes held a profound, fracturing sorrow. On the glass coffee table lay a first-class ticket back to New York, alongside an open, half-packed suitcase. "The jet is ready," Ji-hoon said, his low baritone carrying a finality that tore at the quiet space. "My men will escort you to Incheon. It is no longer safe for you in Seoul, Zara. My world, it is a plague. I will not let it consume you." Zara looked from the ticket to the man she'd grown to love. He was giving her exactly what her deepest flaws demanded, an escape hatch. For her entire life, whenever a situation grew too heavy or alienating, she had retreated to the sidelines, choosing isolation over vulnerability. Sending her away was the ultimate act of protection from a man who treated love like a liability. But as she stared at the empty suitcase, she saw a future devoid of Leah's laughter, empty of the fierce, quiet warmth beneath Ji-hoon's guarded exterior. She realized that running away wasn't safety. It was just a slower way to break her own heart. Zara took a slow, deliberate breath, her expressive brown eyes locking onto his with a brilliant, unyielding clarity. She stepped forward, crossing the distance between them, and deliberately picked up the plane ticket. Slowly, deliberately, she tore it in half. Ji-hoon's breath caught, a rare look of shock fracturing his stone facade. "Zara..." "No," she interrupted, her voice smooth, grounded, and entirely calm under the immense emotional pressure. "You don't get to decide to be lonely just to keep me safe. I ran to the window the night we met because I was afraid of not fitting in. But I am not running anymore. I love Leah, and I love you. If your world is in the shadows, then I am staying right here to help you pull it into the light." A heavy, electric silence filled the room before Ji-hoon closed the remaining distance, his large hands cradling her face with a raw, consuming reverence. He didn't speak, but the absolute devotion in his eyes was a vow. The underworld war ended not with a whimper, but with a swift, absolute execution of power. With his mind entirely at peace and his heart anchored, Ji-hoon systematically eliminated the final rogue factions threatening his empire within a matter of weeks. But he didn't stop there. True to Zara's strength, he began the aggressive, permanent restructuring of his syndicate, dissolving the illicit pipelines and transitioning the entirety of his vast wealth into the legitimate global foundation they had built together. Months later, at a massive international gala celebrating the foundation's global launch, Zara stood at the center of the room in a breathtaking emerald gown. Beside her stood Ji-hoon, his hand resting possessively at her waist, his sharp jawline relaxed as Leah laughed between them. The room was still deferential, still awed, but no longer terrified. The Mafia boss had found his peace, and Zara sat permanently by his side, no longer an outsider on the sidelines, but the undisputed queen of his new, legitimate reign.